When people look at the fall of Rome, the first things that come to mind are the battered and ruined legions, poisoned emperors within marble palaces, and many other things. However, the collapse of empires is not only due to external attacks, they can also collapse from within. And one of the most corrosive forces from the inside is money. Among the reasons for Rome's fall, there were not only invasions, attacks, or corruption. The empire collapsed because Rome's money no longer had any value. If money collapses, the empire falls as well. Looking at this historical event, the fall of the Roman Empire serves as a lesson demonstrating the rules that must still be observed in the modern economy of today's states. Money is not a toy, and the end for states that think they will emerge advantage from the games played will be no different from the Roman Empire. This is the Empire Finance History, and today we will discuss the impact of money on the collapse of a great empire like Rome. Let's go back to the past and imagine the Rome of that time. For centuries, the building block of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. When we look at the period around 211 BC, this currency was pure silver and trade was conducted with it. Sellers wanted it, and ordinary people of society preferred to keep their savings in silver. In Rome, money was not just a tool for trade, but also a tool of trust and power. Trust in the empire was directly proportional to the value of the denarius. Faith in Rome equaled faith in money. However, maintaining such a large empire was not a trivial task. It was extremely costly, and this cost had to be covered somehow. The construction of roads, the creation of aqueducts, and the payment of the legions had to be met. When we reach the 2nd century AD, Rome was having a great deal of difficulty protecting its borders. Germanic tribes, the Parthians in the east, and the resulting increasing unrest within society weakened Rome's hand. They were struggling to find enough money for defense and military power. This is where the story begins to deepen. An economic trick unseen for centuries was resorted to: debasement. The empire, not wanting to lose the trust of its citizens by taking more taxes from the public, began to gradually reduce the amount of silver in the denarius, which it initially used as pure silver. Initially reducing the silver ratio to around 95% during the reign of Emperor Augustus, by the 3rd century, Emperor Caracalla had reduced this real silver ratio to almost below 50%. Just as a lie grows as it is told, the gradually decreasing amount of silver reached a point where, by the middle of the 3rd century, Emperor Gallienus had reduced the denarius silver ratio to below 5%. This decline had now reached a visible level. Silver was now actually a silver-plated bronze disc. This difference began to be clearly felt among the public. This feeling continued with economic insecurity and inflation. As we said, trust equals power. This situation had now disappeared. Prices were gradually increasing because the value of money had hit rock bottom. Nothing remained of the former purchasing power. While one silver coin was once enough for a bag of wheat, now several handfuls of silver were required. This example I give from life was no joke. It turned the lives of Romans, who were like today's minimum wage earners, upside down. In response to the rising expenses of the military forces, soldiers demanded an increase in their salaries. Those in trade no longer accepted the coins whose value had hit rock bottom. Instead, they turned to barter, the beginning of shopping, or of course, they accepted more valuable gold. As trust gradually eroded, emperors minted a large number of cheap denarii, thinking they would stabilize the value of silver. When we look at the most important supply-demand relationship in finance, the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. If the number of cheap silver coins is increased while silver is already not a reliable trade tool, Then the demand for the coin hits rock bottom and society faces one of the largest inflations in history. This is exactly what happened in Rome. A series of repeated inflations had now turned into a cycle, and an economic crisis began. After the 200s and 30s AD, Rome experienced a chaotic period of civil wars lasting nearly 50 years and collapsed economically. In such a chaotic environment, it was unthinkable for emperors to remain on the throne for a long time. Constant assassinations and changing administrations were also a message to external threats that the Roman Empire was no longer as strong as before. The real trigger for this point reached by politics was the underlying financial structure. Farmers, who were the building blocks of production in society, now abandoned or transferred their lands due to economic difficulties. As hopes gradually faded, the Roman Empire tried methods such as fixing prices or mandatory labor obligations to keep the system alive. Unfortunately, no attempt resulted in success. Finally, as a last blow, Emperor Diocletian, who came to power, issued the edict on maximum prices. This edict was a rule that fixed buying and selling costs, and those who did not comply with this edict were punished with death. The edict was a nightmare in itself because an upper limit for prices cannot be drawn when money has no value. This situation ignited the black market sector and official trade dropped almost to zero. The public was quickly enlightened that this edict could not make the economy whole, and finally Rome completely stopped using the denarius. Now a new era was beginning. With Constantine the Great from 312 AD onwards, the solidus, a gold coin kept at a fixed rate if not 100% gold, began to be used in trade. This situation brought at least an order and stability to the empire and continued for centuries in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. However, by the point reached, the Western Empire was now at the point of collapse. The economic building block of Rome was broken with the devaluation of the denarius. The collapse of Rome was not a button popping off, but like a rope unraveling. Rome's money hitting the bottom was one of the major factors. What did this mean when adapted to the present day? Rome was tricking its people by putting low-value coins into the market. Modern-day governments, on the other hand, are not even using gold or silver. They control interest rates in a way by printing paper, thinking they can reduce their debts against inflation by manipulating interest rates. In fact, history should be a tool from which we can learn lessons from the past. Because the result is the same again. Again, the public suffers the misery of the situation under debts eroded by inflation, and no wealth remains. At the end of the day, trust disappears. Rome was one of those who learned this lesson in the most painful way, but it seems that if it continues like this, we will also take a lesson. The inflation crises experienced by Rome have reached the present day, and all the major inflation crises that have occurred chose to use Rome's model. To cover costs, governments chose to devalue their currencies by putting more money into the market. This caused class differences to widen. The Roman currency crisis is a complete plan for collapse as the earliest known example. Let's get a little closer to the present, but go back 100 years. Germany, defeated in the First World War as we came to the 20th century, had to pay very heavy reparations by signing the Treaty of Versailles. The Weimar government of the period also printed more marks to cover its debts, just like Rome's method. When the dates saw 1923, hyperinflation occurred. While bread was 1 mark before the war, by the end of 1923 it was equivalent to a price of more than 200 billion marks. Money had become worthless. People were literally filling wheelbarrows with their salaries and going home. The people were hungry. While those with marks in their hands hit the bottom, those with property, assets, or foreign currency survived this situation much more easily. Economic insecurity, just as in the Roman Empire, also damaged political trust in the government and prepared an environment for Hitler's rise. The same situation was seen in Zimbabwe when we came to the 2000s. Due to production problems, increasing debts, and corruption, the government took the path of the printing presses. As expected, in 2008, inflation saw an incredible peak, with a rate of 89.7%. Prices were doubling every day. Shops were tired of changing price tags on the shelves. Again, a government fought against history instead of being on the side of history, and it lost. Zimbabwe, like Rome, had to change its currency, and trade was maintained with the US dollar or the South African rand. Again, the public paid the biggest price, but it is not necessarily required to scrutinize the largest examples regarding inflation and supply-demand. Even in the USA, one of the world's largest economies, Rome's system is being applied. During the Cold War, Nixon, one of the presidents of the period, played a very risky game by deciding to bring the dollar to a point equivalent to gold. This decision actually showed that the dependence of money was not on gold, but changed according to the trust in the government. The dollar was now a matter of reputation. Just as in Rome, trust in the government made the currency valuable. Like Rome, America had to spend at a level far above its own means, and this situation was a harbinger of economic difficulties. Debt increased, the supply for money grew, and inflation increased uncontrollably. The appearance of the money was the same, but the inside was empty, and the trick played had never changed. If governments say they are growing in the media, know that there is an increasing inflation behind it. This is their method of escape. More money does not mean prosperity, but governments try to reflect it this way. They try to finance consumption by presenting debt as an investment tool. They even portray the rises in the stock market as proof of wealth. The biggest reason why these situations are so dangerous today is that they are global. Rome's collapse was a major crisis. The collapse of an entire empire cannot be taken lightly. The hyperinflation experienced in Weimar was a national crisis, and Zimbabwe's crisis was a smaller-scale local crisis. However, when we look at the whole, today all currencies, never-ending debts, crises, and central banks waiting to print money manage the world's reputation. It should not be difficult to predict that the next collapse will be global, and may even trigger war. Since the viewers of this channel also use history as a guide, they will no longer be fooled by the lies told in daily life. Now, a question for you. What is the lesson you will take for yourself from Rome's currency crisis? Don't forget to drop your own comment below before watching the rest of the video. Now let's continue. The first lesson to be taken is that inflation is always planned. It is a policy. Know that it never happens by accident. It is the secretly taken tax that has destroyed empires since the BC era. Secondly, money consists of a piece of paper. What is truly valuable are the assets and goods that are precious when money loses its value. Thirdly, stability in the economy never lasts forever. If Romans were told in their early days that their money would become worthless in the future, they would have mocked us, so stay alert. The same situation applies to Germans, Zimbabweans, and many other societies. The society's currencies and periods are different, but the story is always the same. While the collapse of the Roman Empire shows us the effect of trust in the financial system, it is an example that reminds us how a trust crisis collapses the system. When the economy hits the bottom, society begins to disperse. Trade melts, armies revolt, internal turmoil occurs, and the end of the government comes. In other words, the most valuable lesson to be taken is not financial, but historical. History does not repeat itself, but if you choose to be against history instead of being on the side of history, history will crush you. The only things that change are time, location, and people. If this video has created a historical awareness as well as the financial choices of governments, do not forget to subscribe for more. History has the answers. Look at history and it will show you where to look.